Welcome to Vegan Business Talk with Katrina Fox, author of Vegan Ventures, Start and Grow an Ethical Business. Hello and welcome to episode 125 of Vegan Business Talk. I'm Katrina Fox, journalist, author and PR consultant and founder of Vegan Business Media, a content events and training platform providing success strategies for vegan business owners and entrepreneurs. Now, just quickly, before we jump into the main part of the show, I wanted to let you know about my online PR course and group coaching program, Vegans in the Limelight. Now, this is a 12-month online program where you have video training that teaches you everything you need to know about how to do your own PR. You can ask questions on the platform, and you can also post your proposed pitches and media releases before sending them to journalists to get my feedback. You also get to jump on a monthly live group call where you can ask whatever questions you want about your business, and you can get tailored help from me on anything to do with raising the profile of your brand. So it might be that I look at your website and give you some feedback, or how to improve your LinkedIn profile and other marketing and PR topics. So if you'd like to find out more about that, just hop on over to veganbusinessmedia.com and you'll see a link there for Vegans in the Limelight. And now on to the main part of the show. In this episode, I interview Simon Newstead, founder of Bite Society, a new vegan food product company in Melbourne, Australia. A vegan for more than 10 years, Simon's background is in technology. He's a co-founder of Friendzoo, a mobile game studio in Hong Kong that has been in operation since 2008. In addition, he's an angel investor and supporter of other companies, including Ocean Hugger Foods, Shiok Meats, Kinds of Grace, and Hungry Planet. Bite Society, a zero-profit company, was started in 2018 and launched its first products, Milky Chocolate Balls and a Chocolate Block, earlier this year. That's 2019 if you're listening in the future. Simon's goal is to lower the price of vegan goods, and he hopes to inspire other founders and projects through transparency and open sharing, including the company's financials. To this end, he's charting the journey of Bite Society via his Vegan Startup podcast. In this episode, Simon discusses the key mistake many startups make and how to avoid it, the pros and cons of either you or others promoting your products as the vegan version of well-known non-vegan products, how to find a co-packer that helps you to keep costs down, how to calculate your margins and profit, and what costs to include that many vegan entrepreneurs don't do, which can result in a business failing, how to sell direct to retailers without going door to door in person, the low-budget marketing strategy he used to gain traction for Bite Society and how to do this right, how the zero-profit company model works, and much more. Here's the interview with Simon Newstead from Bite Society. Hello, Simon, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Katrina. Thanks for having me on board. I'm very excited to go and have this chat.
Well, I'm very excited to speak with you because we were just talking before we came on air, and I know you said very kindly that the podcast was one of the things that inspired you to start your own business. So I was very excited about that, and that leads nicely into my first question, is the question that I ask everyone. I love to kick off with, is the why. So right. What are your drivers for reasons for doing what you do? You've started Bite Society, you've got these two fabulous products, the vegan chocolate balls and a chocolate bar, and we're going to talk a little bit about the business, but tell us about your why you decided to do it, because you've got a background in, a strong background in startups and in business. So tell us about your why first of all.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess maybe I can rewind a little bit and, going right back, when I was a child growing up, I had an experience which I think, a lot of people kind of experienced, which is, being the kind of subject of bullying. And this seems like a very personal way to start the story, but one thing that kind of drove into me was the kind of, the empathy for kind of victims and people kind of, the subject of injustices. And that kind of really, stuck with me over the years. And it was about 10 years ago, I kind of, finally put two and two together and realized kind of, what we were doing to kind of the fellow inhabitants of this planet. And I became vegan myself. So, for ethical reasons to kind of reduce this, sentient suffering. And so that's something that kind of, is in my background. And in parallel, I'd taken a career path of doing engineering first and then getting into, internet, so internet networks and internet applications, and then moving into more content and gaming. So for the last, it's actually about 12 years, I've been running and co-founder of a video games company. So that's something that kind of took me into entrepreneurship and the startup world. I just love to create. I love to create products, and I really enjoy technology and new trends. And so I've been doing this for some time now. And through that kind of journey, I got into thinking about on the vegan side, how can I go and have more impact? So I'd been doing some activism work and organizing outreaches and education and movie screenings and how to go vegan 101 workshops. But around a couple of years ago, I started thinking, well, that's good and that's a limited kind of scope. But actually, if we think about it, most impact is through animal agriculture. It's through food. That's how we kind of have the most impact. And so I started to think, well, could I go and take my kind of tech background and start to get involved with startups? So, I love startups. I've run, as part of a startup. How could I go and support vegan food startups? And so that kind of got me started. So a couple of years ago, I started to look into angel investments. So putting in, small amounts of money at very early stages into vegan startups. And I did that. I made some investments and I kind of helped out those companies, both the ones I invested in as well as just ones I just volunteered to help. And then it kind of led me down the path of saying, well, you know what, I've got this experience and I want to try and have more impact. Why don't I go and start something myself? And that kind of was the genesis of this Bite Society project, which is basically a mission-driven, transparent, a zero profit, I'm sure we'll talk about, a zero profit project to go and try to build a food company that's really for the right reasons and to go and do it openly. And hopefully that can kind of, help educate and inspire other vegan founders and projects in the future. That's the ultimate goal.
Got it. Fantastic. No, I love that you've shared that story. It was just interesting. I was kind of chuckling inwardly when you said, I love technology, because I think probably a lot of vegan business owners are the opposite. It's like the challenges is the technology behind everything. So I think that's great. Absolutely. That you've used those skills that you've gained through your previous businesses to not only to help startups, as you've mentioned with the angel investing, but also starting up your own company but in a completely different field. So just we've touched on the angel investing. So what are you looking for if you're going to invest in a business, particularly as an angel investor? What does that mean for you? Because I know angel investing can mean slightly different things. It could mean giving a bit of money or it could mean offering some kind of support. So what do you look for when you're considering whether to invest or support a company?
Oh, that's a great question. So the first thing I look at personally is the possible impact. I mean, could this project or product really move the needle? As in, is it something that could really displace, a large amount of animal agriculture? So, for example, I was an investor, an angel investor in a company called Ocean Hugger Foods.
Oh yeah, I know David Benson.
Yes,
yeah.
I enjoyed the podcast interview here as well with him.
Yeah.
They do plant-based seafood, starting with ahi tuna and then now an eel product replacement. And that's something that particularly here in Asia, seafood is consumed at mammoth amounts and globally as well. And that has a potentially big impact. So I look at things like that. I look at the impact. So seafood is a huge one, and I did a small investment into Shock Meats, which is working on cell-based crustaceans. So that has a potentially huge impact. Typically as kind of vegans and animal activists and animal lovers, we obviously gravitate towards the animals that are, we see around us and that, are particularly land animals. But, there's a huge trillions of marine animals which are, consumed every single year. I think it's 2.7 trillion marine animals. So, some of these other areas where I think there's kind of a little bit less representation, like crustaceans, I think are really important. So I wanted to, I supported Shock because of that. And there's some plant-based protein company in the US, Hungry Planet, which is doing a range of things. So I kind of I'm a small kind of early stage. You could almost say like friends and family level investor in them and supporter.
Okay, cool.
So I'm looking at the possible impact.
Brilliant. No, I love that. And it's great. It's really exciting actually seeing some of these developments, particularly as you're saying, fish and crustacean replacements, which is a really kind of new and exciting and obviously very necessary area. So you've seen a lot of startups, you've invested in some. What are some of the mistakes that businesses make when they're starting out?
I've seen, I guess, a couple, and I've made a bunch myself in my own business. It's funny. There was a very detailed study a few years back, which is the causes of failure of startups, and it was done by one of the universities in the US, and it was hundreds or thousands of startups which were profiled, and not your typical kind of survivor bias looking at the positive success stories. It was looking at everyone who failed, and some of the key things were something called premature scaling or premature kind of like growth, which is where you make a lot of investments into things when you aren't really ready yet. So it might be committing to a certain production process, or investing a lot of money into expensive hires, and then essentially kind of like burning through the cash before you found this product market fit. So I think in general, like that's one big thing.
That is a big one.
Kind of make decisions before they've kind of really validated there's a real product market fit. I think that's a key one, and there's a million other ways to fail.
But I think that's probably a really important one, and probably quite a common one as well, because particularly like when you raise that investment, you get really excited. It can be hard to get out of your entrepreneur bubble that you believe and you think this product is going to be amazing, and then like you say, you kind of burn through all your money. Perhaps on the I wouldn't say necessarily the wrong things, but perhaps at the wrong things at the wrong time, as you've mentioned. Right. No, fantastic. And what about when businesses are pitching, for example, or when they're seeking investment? What are some of the mistakes businesses make when seeking investment, and what should they do instead?
Well, I guess it really depends on the type of investors. So, there's a whole range, right? For example, in vegan foods and plant-based foods, there's a range right from kind of very mission-driven kind of, right from philanthropy on one side of the scale to, large-scale venture capitalists and funds at the high end. When you get some of these bigger companies who are well down the line and they're kind of there, and there's different pitching and different investors are interested in different things. I think the key thing is to kind of know who you're pitching and know what they're interested in. Like, are they a kind of short-term financial investor who's looking for a 2-year return on investment, and they want to get a 30% return on their investment within a year or two? Or are they someone who's like a long-term mission aligned person like myself? I don't have a time frame. If there's no exit at all, but the business has had a huge impact, I mean, I class that as a success to me. That's my
Brilliant.
exit.
Wow. Right.
So I think that it really depends on who the people is. So in my case, sometimes the startups who I've had chats with, perhaps they're trying a little bit too hard to sell and are trying a little bit too hard to pitch, when actually I just want to have an open conversation and just tell me about what you're doing. What are your challenges? How can I help? And have that kind of two-way discussion.
Nice.
But that wouldn't work with, pitching a VC and,
yes. Of course, yeah. Great, fantastic. No, that's great. That's really helpful, I think. So, all right, let's look at your new business at the moment then. So you've put your skills into creating Bite Society. And as we mentioned, your first products are chocolate balls and a chocolate block. So tell us about what were some of your challenges when you were first starting out with this particular business, and how did you handle them?
Well, that's a great question. I guess the big meta challenge was, I'd never done anything to do with food before myself. I can't cook. I'm not a chef. I've never worked in a restaurant. That's right. And I think probably many of the audience have never either. We're consumers. I'm a great consumer, but I'm not a great creator.
Yeah, exactly.
So could someone with no background and no kind of like track record, is it possible to go and start a food company? And and to do it, cheaply, efficiently, and also, to be frank, while keeping my day job, because I still have my day job in software and technology and gaming.
Got it. Right.
Could I do it as a side project to kind of get a new food project off the ground? That was the big meta challenge, and it seemed very daunting. But I thought, you know what, let's give this a shot and let's see how the process goes. And I guess the specific challenges, there were a couple of major ones along the way to kind of get us to launch. So we started, the conception of this project was about 1 year ago when we first started with the idea and concept. And it's taken about a year to kind of like get to market. We've launched for about 2.5 months now. So I guess the big first challenge was what product? Like, what product are we going to do that we have the resources to do? Because this isn't an investor or VC funded thing. This is a kind of a relatively small bootstrapped budget. What was realistic? Like, I couldn't do, for example, a plant-based steak. Too much R&D. Lots of food scientists, etc. needed. Too expensive. So what could I actually do? And I kind of went through a few different concepts and ideas before kind of settling on chocolate, which I thought was achievable, and it's also something near and dear to my heart, and I think a little bit underserved, especially talking about milky, cheap vegan chocolate.
Yeah.
So that was the first challenge. The second challenge, I guess, was finding a way to produce the chocolate, like developing the formulation, finding a way to produce. So I guess we may get into it, but one of the challenges was to find a co-packer, a contract packer, a manufacturer who I could work with and I could trust, and who would be honestly willing to take on a vegan project. Because a lot of co-packers are, they're not really sure what this vegan thing is. And, there's some selling on my part to go and convince them to go and take on a vegan project.
Really? Interesting.
Even though I am the customer of their services.
Wow.
So I think they're the two biggest ones.
Okay. So let's do, as you mentioned, the co-packing. Let's dive into that a little bit. So, so how did you go about finding somebody or the right co-packer? Because I think it's important to get the right person. So talk us through that a little bit.
That's absolutely.
What to people if they're looking for a co-packer?
Right, absolutely. So in my case, taking a step back, I mean, one of the key goals of this Bite Society project is to reduce the cost of vegan packaged goods. I think vegan products typically tend to be really expensive compared to their, animal ag competitors. And so that was a kind of a personal mission. Actually, it's the biggest kind of goal with the products of Bite Society. So from my side, when looking for a co-packer, I was looking for someone who had economies of scale. Someone who is already doing a lot of production, and by definition, vegan foods are still the minority. They're growing very rapidly, but they're still a very small minority. So I was looking for a co-packer who did non-vegan foods, but was willing to work with me to go and do a vegan formulation and to do vegan manufacturing runs. Of course, making sure everything is kind of up to hygiene and quality standards. And that was important because they already have the economies of scale. They're the ones who are producing millions and millions of units a year. Whereas if I tried to go and do this from my kitchen or even a commercial kitchen, I can't produce at that sort of scale and at that sort of like cost level. So that was the key thing for me. And my that journey took me to Asia. So to looking to kind of manufacturing hubs in Asia to find where can I make this product very cheaply and effectively.
Wow. Okay. So the products are manufactured in Asia and then shipped to, say, Australian retailers. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Oh,
so
interesting. Okay.
The objective is to basically do this as a global project, and we know that we want to expand to other countries. So it was to find a kind of a central hub where we could find a large scale production co-packer base, but also could reduce shipping costs ultimately to serve large parts of the world. And Asia obviously is it's the most population, and China, India, the Southeast Asia. It made sense to kind of base it somewhere there to reduce shipping costs and also to have that kind of lower cost base.
Yeah, so let's talk about the lower cost base, because I know that's a challenge for a lot of people, a lot of vegan entrepreneurs, is that pricing of the products, because the customers get annoyed because it's like, well, why is it so expensive? But obviously what they don't realize is that animal ag is often subsidized in many countries, and that's why. But still, you have to kind of educate the customer. And I love that there are entrepreneurs such as yourself and other companies that are looking to make products financially accessible. So, and I know some vegan entrepreneurs who actually undercharge, but that can obviously be tricky because then they won't have a sustainable business. So what can you share about how to calculate margin and pricing? And you've touched on the Asian factories, because obviously I know there's a bit of a stigma sometimes with, it's being made in Asia. There's this assumption that it's, in sweatshops and, the workers are in terrible conditions and stuff. So can you talk us through a little bit about that, about how you can, I suppose, get an ethical factory whilst, for people, animals and planet, whilst also, keeping the prices low. So a little bit as kind of a double question there about that side of it and about how to calculate the margin and pricing.
Okay, so for the pricing, it's a delicate balance. So for example, our project, we want to get things as cheap as possible, but like you said, we can't make it too cheap or make a mistake, or else we're going to kind of sell ourselves out of business. Every sale we make a loss, and that will not work out well. So what we did is we basically put together a really detailed spreadsheet, a model which really tracks out in pretty minute detail, like every cost involved in this project, right from the cost of goods, which is fairly easy to calculate because that's produced by the co-packer. So they handle the ingredient sourcing, the manufacture, and the packaging. And then I kind of worked out everything else from there. So for example, the cost of shipping containers over to Melbourne, Australia, because we're starting in Australia and now we're in New Zealand and Hong Kong as well.
Oh, cool.
How much does import duties cost? How much does it cost to store in the warehouse? So that before we actually launched, there was quite a lot of preliminary work to kind of figure out all of these costs in detail. So logistics costs, travel, so forth. Based on that, we then we basically added all of those up. And then that gave us a wholesale price. Now, included in that was the cost of paying some freelancers. So I don't get a salary out of this project, so no money goes to me coming back out of this project. However, we do have some freelancers who are helping with, for example, our freelance sales and freelance marketing activities. So I kind of calculated all of those things, and then that gave us the wholesale price. And then we kind of worked on, retailer margins to kind of figure out where did that put us in terms of shelf price. Like in Australia, our target price point is around the $4 mark for 100 grams, for example, for our chocolate ball product.
Right.
And as it turned out, we were really kind of, at that price point, which is getting towards Big Dairy's price point, which I'm kind of excited about, significantly under. I believe that, we're one of, if not the cheapest vegan milk chocolate in the market now. But we're still kind of getting close to Big Dairy's price. But yeah, the key thing was, the funny thing was, there's always extra costs that kind of come up. So for example, a great opportunity to launch at this event, but it costs you $700. Or shipping will take, will cost more if I need to get it there on time and risk not having chocolate melted if it's going to a hotter place, for example.
Yes, yeah.
So there's always it's always good to kind of leave a bit of a buffer, and we kind of have a small buffer these days, maybe a 10% buffer just to kind of cover things. But the objective is really not to charge more than we can. And really kind of keep it at cost.
Yeah. What I love that you've shared there is about the pre-work that you did. You did those calculations before you even launched and even factored in, which I think was really important. Like you say, okay, you've got a freelance sales, freelance marketing. The fact that you factored all of that into the price of the product, I think that's really interesting and really helpful and valuable. So I just want to highlight that to ensure that people hear that, because I think that's a really important one. But I think perhaps quite a few people don't necessarily think about that. They kind of just think about the basics, in terms of the shipping, etc. But there's also that to factor in as well. So that's fantastic. Now, in terms of your launching, I believe so far you've chosen to sell direct to retailers rather than using a distributor. So tell us a bit about why. What are the pros and cons of that approach, and what tips can you offer on how to sell direct to retailers?
Yeah, absolutely. So In our case, it came back to the goal of the company, which was to really radically reduce the price of, the end customer price on the shelves that people buy. And, the idea being that, if they're priced the same and the taste is great, people will be willing to try a vegan version, because, at the end of the day, vegans are still a very small percentage of the population. So back to the route to market, a distributor in my research, would be adding on quite a lot of their margin. Anywhere from 35%, 40% tends to be pretty typical.
And that's on top of the retailer price then. So you've got to pay the distributor a percentage and you've got to pay the retailer.
That's exactly right. So they would put on their, anywhere from 30 to 50% first. And then you would go to the retailer, and then they put their, anywhere from, 25 to 60%, depending on who it is. So that was a big chunk. I mean, that effectively almost can double the price of the product.
Yeah.
By having that extra layer there. Now, of course, there's advantages and disadvantages. So the pros of having a distributor is, of course, you outsource all of that logistical challenge. So you don't have to deal with, all the shipping, and, in theory, they've got a team of sales reps who would really represent your product well, and so forth. But in reality, actually, a product like chocolates is not that complicated. I mean, the storage is fairly simple. The transport is simple, and it's an established category. It just happens to be a vegan version of a milky chocolate. So I didn't think that there was much need for the kind of this, paying the extra for the sales force, because I think I could represent that, and the kind of collective, freelance team could represent that directly to the end shops and chains. And then from the logistics point of view, we actually kind of figured out a fairly efficient way to store in warehouses and to ship out to customers. And so that could be done kind of fairly remotely. So, for example, let's talk practical. If I get a new order, so for example, I got a couple of new orders yesterday, new customers coming on board. So it really only takes about 15 minutes to kind of get them up and running, add them to the stock locator, to organize the shipment, to send from the warehouse, send the message. So it's relatively fast and easy to kind of take on board a new stockist and send to them.
Is that because, though, Simon, you've got quite a robust technological setup for you to be able to do that? Because obviously there's thousands of retailers across the globe. So to have relationships with all of them, that's quite
yes.
intense. So I'm assuming you've got some kind of robust technology in place, and that perhaps that's, your skills from your previous job is helping you in that. Is that right?
I think you raised two important points here. So what I'm referring to going direct is in Australia. So it's in the home market of Australia, where I'm based in Melbourne. Okay. So in Australia, we've decided to go direct because we think we can manage it. And to answer your question, no, it's not any particular technology. It's just using kind of like off-the-shelf, tools. For example, a website that lets you go and pick the cheapest way to send a carton from point A to point B.
Right.
And a way to kind of put, into the kind of store locator website system, which is really easy. So that's nothing special about that. But you're right in terms of like globally, this wouldn't scale because you need to have local expertise. So we're doing a mixed model. So in our home market of Australia, direct, and then we're working in discussions with distributors in other countries. In New Zealand, we have a distributor, and we're looking at distributors now in Hong Kong and Europe and Southeast Asia at the moment.
Got it. So in terms of how to sell to retailers, what tips can you offer if someone wants to decide, okay, I'm ready to get into retailers? What tips can you offer them about how to go about that?
Great question. I think from what I've learned, it's to go and put yourselves in their shoes. Like, what position does this product fit for their audience? Like, why is it attractive to the sort of people who go in there? So, for example, if I'm talking to a Go Vita, like a health shop, a large health chain in Australia, their consumers are going to be motivated by things that are different from, for example, if I go into a vegan shop or if I go into a supermarket. So, knowing the right message to send to them. For example, like our chocolate is 25% less sugar than the equivalent dairy chocolate. So that message would go really well with the health shop.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it seems obvious, but I think, it's important to kind of remember that. Apart from
And
that,
are you kind of cold calling? Because I know, like with some, for example, with some vegan entrepreneurs I speak to, they have a track record of perhaps, selling online first, and they maybe launch in
right.
one particular retailer, and then when they can show that okay, it's selling, then they would approach different retailers. So how did you? I suppose I'm asking, how did you go about getting your first? Like, how do you go about kind of convincing that first retailer or that first batch of retailers to actually take a chance on a brand new product and a brand new company that's got no track history?
Absolutely. Well, I can share in our case, it was through that cold messaging. So I cold messaged the owner of, the cruelty-free shop, and who I'd actually heard on a podcast.
Oh, yeah. I wonder which podcast that was. I know. Jess and I are friends. Yeah.
That's right. And I just emailed her and I said, wonderful, I really, it's very inspiring what you're doing. Hey, I've got this new idea for this business. This was before I'd launched, before I had a product even.
But can I just pause you there, Simon? Because Jess, I know, really supports kind of vegan brands. So she's kind of an opposite one. So what about non-vegan ones? Tell me about them. Because I think they're going to be, the vegan stores are going to be a much easier sell. But what about the non-vegan ones?
Well, it really is as easy as just making a call to the manager and saying, hey, plant-based and vegan foods are growing rapidly. Your consumers want them. We have a new product that doesn't exist at the moment, a vegan milky chocolate that's affordable and tasty. And would you be willing to go and give it a shot? Can I send over some samples?
Okay.
It's literally as easy as that. Most of our sales we don't actually visit in person. Like most of our stockists, we have about 50 shops now.
Yeah.
We don't actually visit in person because that would be inefficient.
It's interesting because I just from listening to the podcast, some of the entrepreneurs that have been on the show literally do that kind of door-to-door thing. So it's interesting seeing all these different models. But I think it's interesting what you just said there is that you, like what caught my, and I'm not a retailer, but what I would imagine would catch their attention is when you said, you mentioned, okay, you led with the trend, plant-based and vegan foods are really popular, your customers want them. I think that was great to leave with that. But then you also said, we've got a product that's not yet available, affordable vegan versions of this. I think that was really important. I think that's important to let retailers know, because they've probably got a ton of other brands. They may have a ton of other brands. They might even have other vegan brands. But if you can add something else into the mix that, okay, this is actually something that's not yet available and it's a vegan version of, whatever it is, I think that's really important. So that's good. That's really good to know that cold, sometimes you do just have to do that cold messaging. And obviously some of them might say no or not yet, and others will say yes, please send them. So that's great.
That's right. And I would say that, you're right that getting the first few on board is really important, and then making them like great kind of references and case studies. So making them a success. So you'd put more effort into onboarding, I guess, and the first handful in the different categories. So your first health shop, your first independent supermarket, your first, quick service restaurant, whatever type it is. And then once you have that, to go and use that as a bit of a case study and a reference. And then, people like to see success. If it's been done elsewhere and, it's less risk for them and it's successful in another shop, then they'll go and be much more open to it. And we find that usually tends to work. The rejection rate is relatively low. So, that's so far it's working.
Fantastic. Well done. Now, you mentioned earlier that Bite Society is a zero profit company. Now, obviously, for the majority of our listeners, that's not going to really work for them, because they need to take a wage. They need to, make this their living. Whereas, you're working in your software business and doing this as an addition. But talk us through, but there may be some people who think, no, actually, maybe I don't need to leave my full-time job. Maybe I can do, run a vegan business as a, kind of side hustle, I guess, or, something in addition. So for those that are, perhaps interested in that, tell us a bit about how that works and how can it be sustainable?
Right. Okay. So that's a great question. So, are we a non-profit? Well, we're a little bit different. We're set up as a company. And so, yes, we have revenues and we have expenses. But the goal is every year that basically there's no money paid out. So we're not going to be paying out, for example, excessive salaries out to folks. We're not going to go and hire expensive, management positions. If at some stage in the future, if I can justify it, if I ever join the business, it will be at a minimum wage in Australia, that level. So that's kind of like the approach. And what's different is we don't have investors, so there's no expectation of kind of like a return to investors, and we don't pay dividends either,
Right.
which is
Right.
another key thing.
So when you say it's zero profit, does that actually mean it's zero profit, or could it be
Yes.
actually making a profit, but you're putting the profits back into the business rather than paying yourself or paying expensive staff?
Yeah, that's a good question. The goal is to kind of run it as a zero profit, as in if I do a big production run. So if we order, for example, a 40-foot container's worth of chocolate, 5-10 tons of chocolate.
Yeah.
That at the end of the day, once all of those chocolates have been sold out, the revenue from that has exactly covered the costs required to go and get it out there. And that's basically how our model works. So, for example, we started with a 20-foot container for the first production run. Our revenue from that should cover everything to go and sell that 20-foot container, and no more. That's kind of the model. Now, the challenge is when you need to scale up, obviously. If this is going well, which it is, and we're now looking at kind of larger production runs, we need to be able to fund those larger production runs. At the moment, that's all coming out of kind of savings, and it's a bootstrapped project. So, for example, I'm looking at a 40-foot container run, which is a significantly more money. That's coming out of savings, but the revenues from that are going to cover that amount. So once we sell through that, and as I said, we put a little bit of buffer on top to go and have some extra to go and make sure that if there's a rainy day and something bad happens, or there's some additional costs. But essentially, it is to go and cover itself. So I guess it's similar to an Amazon model where, Amazon doesn't really, for the first 10, 15 years of its life, it never made a profit. It kind of put all of its money back into the business and into expansion. But I guess the difference would be that we're putting it less into expansion and more just back into the cost of goods.
Got it. All right.
Making the price as cheap as possible.
Great. All right, cool. Fantastic. Now, one thing I want to raise around your chocolate balls is they've been promoted as vegan Maltesers. And for those people, because obviously this is an international podcast, for those of you who don't know Maltesers, I don't know if they're available outside of the UK. I don't know if the Americans know what they are, but they're basically chocolate balls that have got like malt inside them, and they're kind of, they're crunchy, or you can suck the chocolate off, which I used to do, and then the malt melts in your mouth. But they're these chocolate balls made out of malt. And obviously, now that we've got this vegan version of chocolate balls, everyone's like, oh, there's now vegan Maltesers. And I think this has been both a good thing in one sense. It's a kind of a good angle for you to promote them because people recognize, a known brand, and, that you're a vegan version of them. But I think there's also can cause some issues. So can you tell us a little bit about the pros and cons of either you billing or other people kind of billing or promoting your products as the vegan version of well-known non-vegan products?
Absolutely. So I guess this is probably the biggest mistake I've made so far in the project, was that I kind of didn't push back on the retail partners of ours, especially at the launch time, pushing this vegan Malteser message, because actually, you've described Maltesers very well. We're different. We're a milky chocolate coating. That part is, I guess, a little bit similar. However, we're using a Rice crisp core. So it's a kind of a neutral, very crunchy kind of texture. So it's not a malty core. So actually, the expectation, if people see vegan Maltesers, they're expecting kind of a malty experience. Yeah. And that's not what we were. And if I can just kind of do a quick interesting side note, this is really interesting kind of consumer psychology. We did tests with people who expected a vegan Malteser, and we found out that roughly 1 in 2 liked it and 1 in 2 thought it was average. And then we took the same kind of audience of people and we gave them with no expectations, and 4 in 5 people liked it. So if you just did it as a blind taste test without any expectation, right, way more people liked it, because actually I think it's a tasty product, and if you're not expecting something else.
Yeah.
So that was the challenge, is that people used that Malteser. Now, yes, you're right. On one hand, it got viral, and thousands of people saw those social media posts on Instagram and Facebook, and lots of comments and expectation. But at the end of the day, if 1 in 2 people don't like it, that's vastly reduced kind of word of mouth. And not to mention like the legal issues of, using a Malteser in there. And look, I don't want to get into too many details because I'm probably not allowed to, but suffice to say, legal representatives of Mars, did get in touch with one of our
did
retailers
they?
in this reason.
Okay.
And so I'm kind of glad that happened in a way, because then I can go and say, hey, I'm serious. Please don't use the Malteser branding. Now, the other factor, Katrina, is we have a long-term ambition to become a kind of a long-term brand. We want Bite Society to be kind of well-known, and we want to be known for not only the products we do, but what we stand for and how we're unique. So kind of building out our own brand and our own messaging, I think, is something that we want to do, and we can't achieve that overnight, and it will take a while. But we don't want to kind of just be known as, that's the vegan Malteser company, which we're not.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It's interesting that Mars contacted you. I wonder if they might bring out their own vegan Maltesers. And if they did, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because as you say, you're going to create other products anyway. But I think that's an interesting one. I guess that's something to be for people to be aware of. And we've seen this a lot, because people are, I suppose particularly vegans, or also, people who are dairy free, or, wanting to try non-dairy products. We do, I would love someone, I'm just going to put it out there, I would love someone to make a vegan version of a British Twix, because I used to love those, and I haven't come across anything similar. So I can see why people kind of want to get excited. But you're right, when you put it out there, or people are putting it out there saying, these are the vegan version of whatever it is, there is that expectation, and it's very different from just tasting a product randomly to kind of tasting it, and because you're immediately comparing it. And for me, it's been 22 years since I've had a vegan Twix.
Right.
You know what I mean? But if you give me a vegan version of a Twix, I'm going to know whether it reminds me of what I used to have. So I think it's important. And like you say, I'm glad you raised the legal side of things. You have to be a little bit careful there as well, which is great. Right. Now, tell us a little bit about before we wrap up, just tell us a little bit about some of the marketing strategies you've used, because you said it's a bootstrap company. You haven't got necessarily, a massive budget for the marketing side of things. So what marketing strategies have you done that were most effective, and why? I believe you've worked with, or you've collaborated with influencers. Like, for example, you sent me a package when, like I said, we were talking off air. I got back from my 2.5-week trip to New York, where I was at the plant-based food World Conference and Expo, and I came back to my pile of mail, and there was a package from you with a packet of the chocolate balls and a bar of chocolate and some badges and some buttons, I think they're called in the US, a whole nice little package. And it was a very nice surprise, and of course I ate them and I posted about them. So talk a little bit about some of the effective marketing strategies you've had to date.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're kind of coming into this with no advertising budget and no event sponsorship budget, and that was kind of clear in our business model. We looked at how much it would cost to do an ad campaigns, and we just saw the price increase in the chocolate that would be resulting from that. So we thought, can we do this in a smarter, kind of cheaper way? And one way is exactly what you've mentioned, is to go and to reach out to influencers and go and say, hey, this is who we are, this is our mission, love what you're doing, can we go and ask for your support? So we've never ever paid an influencer, which is very uncommon, because most influencers are paid these days. We've never paid an influencer, but we've got a lot of support from influencers, because they kind of resonate with the product, but also who we are and what we're doing, why we're doing it. So we're contacting influencers. We're sending out little packs to them, so samples of chocolate and some very cheap other items like stickers and badges, like you mentioned. And then seeing if they will support us and share the word. So that has been really helpful. A bit of logistical work to do, so but it's
more
it's
cost, but reasonably low cost in terms of sending out.
That's right. So I mean, for $2 or $3, $4, to send a shipment of samples, including the cost of goods, and shipping, you have a potential to reach thousands of people if they choose to go and make a post or a video or a story about it.
Nice.
I guess that and also just the sharing, like being open with our sharings, and food companies don't usually share things like the mistakes they made, or the big, the problems that they've gone through. It's always good news and good PR. So we're the opposite. We share the ups and the downs, and I think that naturally kind of people are interested in that, and I think that's helped us a little bit get off the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. It can help with the brand loyalty, because people want, I know it's a bit of a buzzword, but that authenticity, people like to say being real and being honest. And I appreciate your honesty and sharing on this podcast. So just to wrap up then, tell us about the long-term vision for both yourself and the brand for Bite Society.
Absolutely. So I guess there's two steps in our journey. We've launched now. We're off the ground. I think we're kind of hitting just about to pass our first 20,000 units shipped. We're looking to kind of take this global now. So in the next kind of 1 to 2 years, we want to go and take on board distributors in other countries. So we're looking at EU and Asia and North America. And we want to kind of take what we've made. The product is solid. The production is good. Take that and try to replicate that in other places, because, that's how we can go and have, a bigger impact. And then I'm also looking at kind of expanding, if that goes well, to go and expanding the portfolio as well. So we ultimately want to have a very wide range of, same thing, low cost but tasty vegan products. So looking at things that, that we think we can do, that are not too technically, difficult, that would require millions in R&D, which we don't have.
Yeah.
But ultimately we are looking at kind of other things. So probably starting first with expanding confectionery. So we're looking at, for example, we're prototyping a wafer product at the moment, which is very exciting. And then beyond that, maybe other categories. So, for example, like instant noodles might be an interesting one. The current ones on the market tend to have palm oil, or they tend to be non-vegan, or there's various issues. So that might be an example of a relatively, simple next step for us. But that's just an
down
idea.
The track. Got it. So, and you're keen at the moment not to have investors, and obviously we're seeing a trend now with people buying out vegan brands, like larger multinational corporations buying out vegan brands. Is that something you perhaps see down the track or not? And I know it's really difficult to judge. I'm just kind of curious whether you're kind of very set on, no, this is your baby and, you want to hang on to it with your model.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, would they be willing to go and keep the kind of ethos of the company? Like, would they be willing to be 100% transparent to the point of like sharing revenues and expenses? And I find that hard to see how someone could do that. Like, I really just couldn't imagine that.
Yeah.
But so I'm guessing in reality the answer is no. And personally, I view this as kind of a long-term activism project. So
I love
it. I just couldn't see a way.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's great that you're almost creating a different way of doing business, and hopefully others will follow suit. And particularly if people start to demand that and expect that, that could be a nice, more kind of ethical way of doing business, which is fantastic. So look, you've shared some wonderful tips and advice, both as an investor and as a business owner and a startup, Simon. So it's been fabulous having you on the show. I shall personally look forward to whatever other products you come out with. Yeah, remember what I said about the vegan Twix? No, I'm kidding.
Duly noted.
But no, it's been great having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Katrina. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So that was Simon Newstead from Bite Society. You can find out more at bitesociety.com. And that link is on the show notes page at veganbusinessmedia.com/podcasts and going to episode 125. Now for some vegan business news highlights. The Plant-Based Foods Association, PBFA, has launched with member company Upton's Naturals to file a suit in Mississippi in the US, challenging the state's new labelling law, which could make using meat terminology to describe plant-based foods subject to criminal penalties. The law went into effect on the 1st of July, that's 2019 if you're listening in the future, and the PBFA's lawsuit was filed the following day on the 2nd of July. The lawsuit has been brought to protect PBFA members' First Amendment rights to label their foods in a way that consumers understand and to stop the new law from being enforced. This latest suit is part of PBFA's ongoing work to defeat the meat and dairy lobby's efforts to restrict the use of common-sense terms by PBFA member companies. In addition to the new lawsuit in Mississippi and an ongoing lawsuit in Missouri, PBFA has been working in over half the states to ensure its members can continue to use terms consumers understand. So far, the association's efforts have been largely successful, with most of the state bills introduced this year either being defeated or significantly narrowed in scope. While Mississippi's law is the first to go into effect, other states the association is watching closely are Arkansas and Louisiana. These bills were enacted with similar language to the Mississippi law. Last year, laws were enacted in Missouri on meat labelling and in North Carolina on milk labelling. So this is obviously a worrying trend, but good to see the PBFA fighting against these labelling laws. At the recent Plant-Based World Conference and Expo in New York, I recorded a panel moderated by PBFA's Executive Director Michelle Simon and featuring several other legal professionals called Know Your Legal Rights and Responsibilities. And some of these topics they discuss on that panel. And you can watch this video on the Vegan Business Media website. And there's a link to that on the show notes page for this episode. A startup is making a vegan mozzarella cheese by creating casein identical to that found in cow's milk via microbial fermentation, reports Food Navigator. New Culture is looking to raise $2.8 million to develop the cow-free cheese that the founder, Matt Gibson, claims will deliver the taste, functionality and nutrition that plant-based cheeses can't match. Gibson, who moved his operations from New Zealand to California after taking part in the life sciences accelerator IndieBio, has filed a preliminary patent for New Culture's production process and predicts the product will be on the market within 3 years. New Culture joins a currently small group of companies, including Perfect Day and Geltor, that use genetically engineered microbes as mini protein factories. Wow. It's interesting to see these high-tech developments. And if you're concerned about GMOs, Gibson said that genetically engineered microbes are currently already used in dairy cheese making, although most consumers aren't aware of this. He also stressed that although the proteins he's making are produced by a genetically engineered microbe, the microbe is not present in his animal-free casein proteins. Exciting stuff. So that's it for this episode of Vegan Business Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a review and rating on iTunes or any other platform you're listening on. Finally, I encourage you to head over to veganbusinessmedia.com, where you can find more free resources as well as details of how we can work together to help you grow your vegan business. I'm Katrina Fox, author of Vegan Ventures, Start and Grow an Ethical Business. And I look forward to catching up with you in the next episode of Vegan Business Talk. Bye for now.